That, I'll turn it over to Paolo Cadoni, Chair of the IAIS Capital Solvency and Field Testing Working Group, to take us through the presentation. Over to you, Paolo.
Thank you very much, Lydia, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. As Lydia said, I'm Paolo Cadoni. I'm the chair of the IIS Capital Solvency and Field Testing Working Group, and I also work at Bank of England as the head of insurance policy. I would like to welcome you today to the public background call on the development of ComFrame material for the ICS supervisory reporting and public disclosure. What I would like to say today, to talk about some topics that are keeping us busy since the approval of the ICS in December last year. I will start you giving you a bit of stepping a bit back and refreshing a bit your memories about what has been adopted in December 2024. And I will also talk briefly about the ICS implementation project. Then I move to detail about the work we are doing in respect of ICS, public disclosure and supervisory reporting. Next slide, please. This is pretty much that. And in terms of ICS overview, I mean, just to remind you that ICS, the purpose of the ICS, which was adopted in December 2024, is to create a common language for supervisory discussion of group solvency and to enhance global convergence among group capital standards. Just to remind you also, the ICS is a consolidated minimum group-wide standard for international active insurance group, IIGs. I mean, IIGs are those very large international firms with cross-border firms. We're talking about firms which have insurance assets above $50 billion or premium above $10 billion, operates in 3+ jurisdictions and have at least 10% of the premium written outside the main jurisdiction. Just to remind you also, the IIS aim to be globally comparable and to reflect all material risk. It targets a value at risk 99.45 over a 1-year time horizon, and has been developed as a prescribed capital requirement, and it constitutes the quantitative elements of ComFrame. In terms of objectives, policyholder protection and financial stability, as I said before, comparability of outcome across jurisdiction, but also promotion of sound risk management, minimize inappropriate procyclical behavior, and also in developing that, we try to strike an appropriate balance between risk sensitivity and simplicity. Just next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of elements, we have 3 main elements. One is the valuation of assets and liabilities following a market adjusted approach. Then a capital an approach a standardized approach for the calculation of capital requirement and internal modeling framework, and also consistent criteria for the determination of capital resources. It covers, in terms of risk coverage, it reflects all material risk that international active insurance group portfolio activities are composed of, and also reflects both on balance sheet and off balance sheet type of activities, and so on. We move to the next slide as well. In terms of the project, after spending 6 years of development and field testing, we moved to a 5-year monitoring period, and as anticipated before, in December 2024, we approved the IIS AGM the ICS, and now we are moving towards its implementation. And its implementation consists of a set of implementation activities, which are the object of the discussion today. Now, when moving to ICS implementation project. Next slide, please. Next, okay. Just to remind you also, when we talk about what is the role of the IIS in respect to implementation, we should note that while the IIS is a global standard setter for insurers, the IIS doesn't have any legal authority to mandate implementation of its standards into national legislation. It's about implementation. It's up to members. The IIS members are committed to implementing IIS standards and supervisory material, while in doing so, also can adapt it to reflect specific market circumstances. And again, as with other IIS standards, the ICS will constitute a minimum standard, which IIS members will implement or propose to implement, as I said before, taking into account specific market circumstances. In terms of the projects, next slide, please. In terms of the projects that the projects we are undertaking at the moment, I mean, 4 main projects with maps to the 2025-2026 IIS roadmap. The first project is about the development of ICS-related new standards, and this refers to the ComFrame element of supervisory reporting and disclosure for the ICS. Then the second element is support to ICS implementation, and this constitutes the Q&A that supports supervisor during implementation, the Q&A process, but also the production of a yield curve for benchmarking purposes for supervisors. And then the other 2 activities more related to the implementation assessment. One is the implementation assessment questionnaire, the self-assessment questionnaire to be developed this year, and also a more 2-year project, which is the development of ICS implementation assessment methodology. Next slide, please. Now, moving to talk about what we are going to develop with respect to ICS-related standard. Now, in the term of context and objective for this project, I would say, following the adoption of the ICS, what we're trying to do is to develop for the ICS the specific supervisory reporting and disclosure framework. And this is, again, to promote one of the objectives of the ICS, which is the promotion of the use of a common language for the supervision of international active insurers. The development of the standards refers to ICP 9, supervisory reporting, and ICP 20, which is public disclosure. So effectively, we are developing the ComFrame elements of ICP 9 and ICP 20. Now, just to give you a bit more background about these 2 ICPs. Next slide, please. ICP9 focuses on the general processes and procedure the supervisor should have in place with respect to supervisory review and reporting. The ICP provides guidance on how supervisor uses both off-site and on-site inspections, examine the business of each insurer, evaluating an insurance financial condition, conduct of business, corporate governance framework, and overall risk profile, as well as assessing the insurance compliance with relevant legislation and supervisory requirements. When it comes to ICP 20, it's about the requirement of the supervisor imposes on firms to disclose relevant and comprehensive information in a timely manner in order to give policyholder and market participants a view of its business activities, risk, performance, and financial position. Just a clarification, one in doing so, in developing the ComFrame element with respect to public disclosure, we're working more towards a subset of what is in the public, what is in the public domain, in the supervisory reporting, sorry. Next slide, please. Where are we in respect of the drafting of supervisory reporting and public disclosure material? What we are doing at the moment is developing a set of high-level principles that are going to draft, they're going to guide the drafting of this ComFrame element. We are discussing about the granularity of reporting, and also what should be in common between supervisory reporting and public disclosure, and also in terms of balance, what should go in the standard and what should go into guidance. And also, we're also looking at whether there is a need for separate supporting material to supervisor, like an application paper, to provide example of how supervisor can address and tackle the issue of supervisory reporting and public disclosure. But also we're trying to see what's the right balance between quantitative and qualitative elements of reporting and disclosure. And finally, but not last for important, how elements should be assessed in the context of the US aggregation method. Now, as I said before, I mean, in terms of type of activities to drive all this list of tasks we have to accomplish, we have set out an internal, we are doing this internal stock take of whole current reporting and disclosure practice across supervisors. We're starting today also to collect views from stakeholders to a public background call. And then we're following that, drafting high-level principle on how detailed the supervisory reporting material should be, and how prescriptive and should be, and what is the right balance between standard and guidance. And also, we're paying due consideration on how to assess the observance of standards in respect to the US implementation, the US implementation of the ICS, which is the aggregation method. In terms of timeline, next slide. As I said before, we launched this exercise in the first quarter, starting in January. And today we're also launching this exercise with the public, with this public background call. And in the second quarter, we'll be proceeding with the drafting of reporting and disclosure requirements, and also contacting, where possible, experts both on the reporting side and the disclosure side. And also, the aim is to finalize this material and in Q3 this year, and then go in consultation the last quarter and getting this document approved around November this year. And in 2026, we aim to resolve all the comments arising from the consultation and publish and finalize the reporting and disclosure material for publication around November 2026. And this effectively concludes what I had in mind today, and I would like to open the floor now for questions. Who would like to start? A question, please raise your hand or write a message in the chat. See, David Morse? Can we open the mic of David Morse? Secretariat? So the hands up of David Morse, can we open his mic, please?
Thank you. I just want to understand, no further field testing this year, collecting of numbers. I'm not seeing that on the high-level timeline.
No, we're not going. As we anticipated when we approved the ICS, we were not going to collect. We're going to, the field testing and monitoring periods come to an end. So I think that our volunteers, which supported over the years, and ourselves as well, tied to collecting data with, if there is any eventual ad hoc data requested to support the implementation, we're talking around 2027. We will be, but for the time being, no data collection.
Okay, thank you very much.
I saw it on the chat. You, Francis, can we open his mic?
Everybody, thanks ever so much for that clear presentation and what you're doing. Just had a question in a couple of areas in relation to this. Clearly, as you look at the implementation methodology, there are existing reporting frameworks that are being applied at jurisdiction. Are you hoping to advance the work on this reporting so that when you think about the implementation self-assessment, there is some element of being able to assess whether the reporting requirements are being met or not? I was just thinking that in the context of, obviously, companies will not want to duplicate the reporting requirements, and they may well have local requirements. I just wonder whether you thought about how you integrate or interact this element with the implementation assessment exercise. And the second question I had was particularly in relation to the second ICP on public disclosures. And obviously, some of about the nature of the business, the risks of the business, a lot of that is also covered in accounting standards and financial reports, particularly whether it's IFRS or IFRS 17 or FASB requirements as well. And I wonder whether you're going to do some specific, also looking to make certain that you don't end up having duplication between maybe the accounting or the financial reporting aspects and the solvency reporting, because traditionally the supervisory reporting tends to focus more on the supervisory capital reporting than it has some of the more generic, and whether you're going to integrate or have any discussions with the IIS accounting groups at the same time. That was my two questions, Paolo.
On the second question, I mean, the work on supervisory reporting and disclosure is done in cooperation with the accounting and audit working group. So we're very wary about that. But what I would like to say is actually, whatever we do here, whatever standard we come out with needs to be implemented by jurisdiction. And as I pointed out in the slides, the IIS doesn't have any power. So effectively, we will produce the standards, which are minimum standards. In jurisdiction, we will have to implement that. So even if we were to produce templates, there will be like example of what jurisdiction may be doing that. We're going to use language in a such way that effectively, that can be implementable, will be standard, we can be reflected in different jurisdiction. And yes, I think that should address your question.
Okay. Just to clarify on that, Paolo, so, I mean, we often have the debate even at a local jurisdiction. Some information may be in your accounts, some information may be in your supervisory reporting. We just need to consider that, I think, moving forward, because some of that you don't want to necessarily duplicate information.
Absolutely. I mean, as I say, when it comes to supervisory reporting, this is information that needs to be produced for the purpose of supervisor, public disclosure for the public. And yeah, I mean, we're not describing the vehicle where this should, when it comes to public disclosure, I don't think we're going to prescribe the vehicle where these things will come.
Okay, thanks.
Don't see any other hands, any other comments, questions? Tobias.
Tobias Wassmann from Swiss Re. First of all, many thanks to the EIS and the Secretariat for holding this public background session on this Friday morning or afternoon, depending on where you're sitting. Much appreciated. One question on the timeline, whether I got this right. Are jurisdictions then expected to implement the new standards by 1st of January 2027? Is that correct?
No. This is a time where actually, we're going to consult end of this year, and we're going to finalize the requirements after post-consultation, take into account your comments to the consultation in November 2026.
And then like entering into force by 2027?
No, that's not specified. That will have to be discussed. Because anyway, whatever we produce in terms of the reporting and disclosure, will have implication on, if people need to adjust their reporting, they will have implication on the required time to do that.
Understood. Thank you.
I think I saw a comment from Nicola about yield curve. The yield curve, well, I'll refer to the Secretariat, but the response to that, but the curve will be produced in the actually to support the implementation by supervisors. And we are also hosting a workshop with supervisor to explain how the curves will be produced. Are for benchmarking purposes. They are not for public disclosure per se, because we'll have lots of issues related to responsibility in this production of these curve, if they were to be public to firms too. But I'll let Roman intervene from a secretarial perspective, because they are producing them.
Yes, hi everyone. So we used to be producing yield curves for the purpose of the data collection exercises, so under the monitoring period or previously for the field testing. So these yield curves were shared with the volunteers so they can produce consistent data for the purpose of this data collection exercise. So now we are moving to a new phase where basically groups are subject to their regulation, their own regulation, and the yield curves are supposed to be produced or derived by their supervisor. So as Paulo has mentioned, we will continue because our members have asked us to be able to provide as a reference yield curves as we used to produce them for the purpose of this data collection exercise, but this will not be shared publicly because again, they have no kind of regulatory power also because it's really for you to use the yield curves as stated in your own regulation.
Any more questions? Mary Francis, can we open the mic?
It's a very helpful presentation. My question relates to the implementation assessment methodology. I would like to ask what your plans are for stakeholder engagement with respect to that methodology and whether there will be any consideration of public consultation. Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat, Paulo?
Now, you want to pick the ones up or shall I answer?
As you prefer.
I mean, I don't remember exactly the engagement, but the engagement with stakeholders, but there's not certainly there will be a public consultation on this one.
Yes, that's correct. So, so that's not exactly the topic of this public background call, but we are also working on the development of the implementation assessment methodology, which is an internal IAS document, which will be setting out the expectation how we want to conduct ICS assessments. So there's not going to be a public consultation. We do public consultation when we develop supervisory material like the one we are discussing today. But of course, we're also very mindful that the stakeholders may want to engage with us. So we will be doing updates. The first one will be at our global seminar in June. Virtual global seminar, and also provide ways along the way for stakeholders to provide their input in the form of webinars, but still the exact form will still have to be decided. But there will not be any public consultation.
I see Chris Hunker. Can we open his mic? The mic open? Can we open the mic of Chris Hunker? I see his hands raised.
The mic is open. His mic
Chris?
is open.
Chris, the line is open. Probably has some problems with his mic. Any other questions? Any other question? When we pick up Chris' question once we're able to reestablish the line for with him. No more questions? The question from Fernando, think on the thing of further data collection until at least 2027. That should be pretty much it. I think that depends. I mean, if we need any more data, will be probably to address some of the issues which been and it's not possible to rely on data already collected in the past to the field testing on the monitoring period. So effectively, any type of data call will be essentially targeted to the specific areas where we will need. So once we ramp up that the in-depth assessment, which is starting from 2027, this will be the case.
Maybe, Paolo, we can just add that we are considering the possibility of doing a very targeted data collection for the purpose of building a view of the IAG representative portfolio, which is an input to the yield curves we are producing. So that's not any ICS calculation; it's really information about the composition, investment of investment per currency for IAGs in order to get this view of this representative portfolio. So this is still being discussed. We will be getting back to the volunteer groups once we have a clarity of what we will need in terms of the information. But again, this is absolutely nothing comparable to what we have collected in the past, because there will be no calculation. It's only basically information about on the asset side.
Effectively, if we cannot get this type of information through the supervisory authorities, we would like to get back to you. I mean, what Roman was referring to is, for example, if you remember during the field testing and the monitoring period, for example, to build the general bucket, we use the general bucket reference portfolio. We use the weights in each for the weights of assets that you add in different currencies. For example, for the British pound, we use the weights of all assets invested there, and we use that to build the reference portfolio. So this type of information doesn't require calculation. It may, if we cannot get this information directly from supervisor, we will probably go back to you. But this will be really a minimal type of information for the purposes of the yield curves. You can see that Chris probably has changed the medium. So Chris, let's try again.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Right. It was following on from the question that was asked about public consultation on the assessment criteria. I was curious about that and why not have a public consultation. After all, there was a public consultation on the aggregation method, which turns out now is restricted only to US insurers. So the assessment criteria that are now being applied for all other insurers, all other IAIGs in the world, is not subject to public consultation. That seems incongruous with the approach that was taken for a method that's only being applied to the minority of IAIGs in the world.
I think, Chris, we need to separate. There are two different exercises. One is a comparability assessment. That's a different in terms of, that comparability assessment was assessing whether the US aggregation method could be used as an implementation, as an implementation of the ICS. But as will happen with all jurisdiction, even the US will be subject to an implementation assessment. And effectively, this is more about like we have done, for example, for the holistic framework. We had a methodology for the holistic framework, and we have methodology also for ComFrame implementation assessment. But I'll let Roman to cover the points I've not from the Secretariat perspective.
But I think you're right, Paolo. The comparability assessment of the US aggregation method was a kind of a unique exercise in a sense. So we had to develop an approach based on a definition of comparable outcome and then high-level principles and criteria to deal with this kind of uniqueness of this exercise. When we are speaking about the ICS implementation assessment, we are very much in what the kind of a bread and butter of what the ICS is doing the implementation assessment of the supervisory pillar of the holistic framework, of the ICPs, of ComFrame. So we are developing some elements to reflect the specificity of the ICS, but it's really going to be the overall assessment process that we follow for every IAS standard, and we have not done any public consultation for other aspects of the assessment of any other standard of the IAS. So that's very much the standard approach that we have for the assessment. Well, the comparability assessment was something a bit new, and we believe that for this we wanted to have a very open and transparent process, and getting at every step feedback from the stakeholders. But again, the fact that there will not be a public consultation doesn't mean that there will not be stakeholder engagement. We mentioned that there will be many touch points. We plan to finalize the methodology only at the beginning of next year. And one important step in the development of this methodology will be what we call the high-level principles that will give a little bit the high-level expectations in terms of how we want to assess the elements that are very specific to the ICS. And so there will be the possibility to get feedback from stakeholders along the road. We are still developing the plan, but yes, there will be the opportunity to provide your input.
Okay. I saw a comment from you about can we not collect this data for the portfolios? Why the GMA? I mean, just to say that we will only go to firms if, as a last resort, if we cannot get this information through other means. I mean, in some cases, the issue there is that sometimes we don't have sometimes we don't have a legal gateway for that. So effectively, we need to get them directly from you. But this will be only our last resort. Also, you have to bear in mind that there are confidentiality agreement depending on the type of exercise, which tend to keep the data separated from one data collection to the other, even within the IIS. Any more questions? The presentation slides will be shared. Yes, they will be shared there. Update on the direction of travel in terms of the ICS implementation methodology. In terms of the timeline there, I mean, as you say, I mean, just to remind you that in June, the IIS published effectively some high-level messages with respect to the ICS implementation, and this high-level message contained a two-stage approach, like it has happened for the holistic framework, which consisted in 2 stages. One considered a baseline type of assessment, and followed by an intensive, in-depth assessment. And at the moment, in order to guide the production of the implementation assessment methodology, at the moment we are developing, like we're doing for supervisory reporting disclosure, high-level principle to drive the drafting of that. So we will be reporting on these issues in May our PDC, and in June, and then it will be discussed in Exco in June, and then it will be followed up and with the discussion on these issues at as Roman pointed out, at the global seminar, the IIS global seminar in July. So effectively, follow for that we would, once we complete the work on that level, in parallel we'll be developing the self-assessment questionnaire. You'll realize that there's a bit of dependency with respect to that. The self-assessment questionnaire, which is going to be prepared by the end of this year and launched end of this year, beginning of next year, it's just a simple self-assessment on where jurisdiction stands with respect to the ICS requirement, and this will provide us with an opportunity to, first of all, provide an opportunity and also supervise an opportunity to assess where they stand compared to the ICS requirement, but also for us to plan and prioritize those jurisdictions will have to go into the first wave of in-depth assessment. So effectively, which will start from 2027. Based also on the outcome of the self-assessment and all the high-level principles and so on, we'll be developing the implementation assessment methodology. Anything else we missed?
Nobody had their hand up. Maybe we can unmute them, and then we have some questions in the chat.
Yes, hello. I had a question on the implementation assessment of the ICS. Will it also include the assessment of the implementation of supervisory reporting and disclosure standards that you are discussing today?
I think there is a separation from what is the ICS in itself, which is the level 1 and the level 2 text, and what is other material which is relevant to the ICS, which is more ComFrame type of base, which is not only the supervisory reporting and disclosure, but also other material which are found there. So we'll in terms of the timeline, I mean, at the moment we are focusing on the implementation assessment methodology will be focused on the level 1 and the level 2 text, because that's important. Because for the rest of the material, which are broader ComFrame type of material, there is already an existing IIS developed methodology. So I'm not. So to cut the long story short, there is an assessment which is on the ICS, which will follow the ICS implementation methodology. The other element of ComFrame, when will be assessed, will follow the ComFrame and the broader IIS type of methodology. Proman, I missed something, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the standards that we are planning to develop for the supervisory reporting and disclosure standard, they will be part of the ComFrame, and they will be assessed as any other standard of ComFrame. We are doing something a bit specific for the ICS due to, well, the length of the ICS, the level 1 and level 2 document, and also because we said that we don't want to do a line-by-line assessment for the ICS, meaning the level 1 and level 2 text. So we need to say what we mean by not a line-by-line exercise. But for the other standards, they will follow the same process and methodology as for any other qualitative ComFrame standard.
I'm not sure. I think we got a question from, again, Nicolas Joly about, but I'm not sure I understand the question.
No, there won't be any new items related to the ICS to be expected in the IAM to be launched. And for a very simple reason is that we don't expect to do any assessment of the ICS before 2027. So we don't expect to receive any ICS element. I mean, we may have to discuss whether we want to receive any ICS element in the future, but at least for the moment, there's no intention to include any ICS element to the IAM.
Then there's a question about IFRS 17. IFRS 17 considered next step of the ICS implementation. Just to be clear, I mean, we will be assessing the ICS, not the IFRS implementation. And effectively, it's up to jurisdiction to tell us what they would like to be assessed, and we will proceed with the assessment of what they tell us their ICS implementation will be. Don't see any more question on the chat, unless I miss something. Anything else? And no more questions? Any final question? If not, thank you very much for your participation and contributions. And I look forward to seeing you shortly at the next, at least at the global seminar, to continue discussing this type of issue, if not earlier. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.